My name is Janine Steele, and I'm the project manager for the Domestic Motion Picture Fund. So if you do not want to be recorded, we encourage you to change your display name or keep your camera off. A few other housekeeping notes. We'll ask you to keep your microphone on mute because it's a fairly large group today. It's good to know our presentation is going to be broken up into sections, and we'll be pausing at the end of each of those sections for any questions that may come up related to that particular area topic. So for that, we ask you to type your questions into the chat, and then our Creative BC staff will scan for them. We'll either answer directly in the chat if we can, or we'll repeat the question verbally for everyone to hear. In the interest of time, we do ask you if you have a question that's very specific to either your project or your particular situation, that instead perhaps you hold it and email us directly so that we can talk one-on-one later next week or thereafter. As well as you can see, closed captioning on English should be displaying on your screen, though it will only display what I say. So when Matthew asks questions, I will try to repeat them. But do please let us know in the chat if it's not working for you. So a little bit quickly just about Creative BC. If you're new to the organization, Creative BC is an independent society created and supported by the province to sustain and help grow BC's creative industries. That includes motion picture, interactive and digital media, music and sound recording, and music and book, magazine and book publishing. The society delivers a wide range of programs and services with a mandate to expand BC's creative economy. And just a quick, this is your Creative BC team for all of your funding needs outside of music. And joining us on the call today, as well as myself, is Raquel Dominguez, who's our programs coordinator, and Matthew Perry, who's our program analyst. So what are we going to be talking about today? Just a reminder that the information we're going to provide today really is for guidance purposes only. We encourage you to refer to our program guidelines first and foremost for any questions or concerns you might have. So we'll talk quickly about an overview of the program. We'll dive deeper into eligibility and the application process, and then we'll end with a little bit of overview of how the evaluation and decision-making and post sort of decision process will look like. So first off, you may have heard the words Real Focus BC or the Domestic Motion Picture Fund as you heard about this new program. So I want to give you a little bit of context about what these are and how they relate. So Real Focus BC is our umbrella initiative for all motion picture industry programs. And that's sort of the core work that we do for film and television. Notably, you may be familiar with the Project Development Fund, which is a market-triggered program and one of our longest standing programs at Creative BC. The Domestic Motion Picture Fund was a new $2 million investment by the province into Real Focus BC that was announced this past fall in 2020. I started just over a month ago now with Creative BC with the mandate to oversee the disbursement of this funding. And the Equity and Emerging Development Program is the first program that we're able to release. There will be more programs coming that have different targeted needs, focus on different needs and different goals. But this is the first of what we hope is a really robust system for you. So we want to thank the government of BC for their ongoing support for all of the work that we do. So what is the Equity and Emerging Development Program? So this was really designed to recognize that historically there have been systemic barriers to access for many, and we want to work on creating pathways for these people. Our aims are to support equity and diversity in BC's domestic motion picture sector by increasing access to funding for underrepresented filmmakers. It's to uncover new and diverse voices who we may not know and who may not have previously been able to benefit from mainstream media funding. To support projects during the development stage that reflect and enhance the cultural diversity of our province, and to provide opportunities for developing commercially ready and market viable projects. We will be accepting applications to this program through two streams, for emerging filmmakers and for equity filmmakers. And those are artists who identify as Indigenous, Black, people of color, LGBTQ2S+, or people with disabilities. So a little bit of the highlights of what is involved in the program. So the phase of funding that we're supporting is development. The maximum you can request from us for your project is $10,000. In terms of eligible genres and formats, it's pretty wide open, and I'll get into the details of that a little bit later, but pretty much anything goes here. The overall budget available that we have to spend within the program is $200,000, and the deadline to apply will be April 9th, 2021 by 11:59 p.m. on the dot. And most importantly, for this program, no market trigger or other financing is needed to apply. So you only need to spend, account for, spend the money from Creative BC if that's all you need to meet the development activities of your project. And again, we'll talk about that in a bit more detail further on. So getting into a little bit around eligibility, applications can be accepted from individuals or companies. And for individuals, you must be a BC resident. And what that means for us is you have to be either a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident who has resided in the province for at least 200 of the previous 365 days on the date of your application, and that you filed income taxes in BC in the last taxation year. Further, because this is targeted programming, you will need to self-declare as either an emerging filmmaker or an artist from one of our underrepresented groups. And that self-declaration will be one of the questions that gets asked in our online application form. In terms of companies, if you're a company applying, you must be a company incorporated in British Columbia or Canada. You have to have your head office in BC. And the primary owner or majority common voting shareholders of your company must meet our individual eligibility, including that self-declaration status. So in terms of whether you're an individual or a company, the 100% of the copyright of the project you're proposing to develop must be owned, controlled, or optioned by the applicant. There are some exceptions for international or interprovincial co-productions or co-ventures, which we'll get into a bit more detail a little bit later on. And you must be in good standing with Creative BC. So in terms of eligibility around what do we mean when we say emerging filmmaker? And I think, part of what I'll talk about here is this is a pilot program, and this is a pilot definition that we're working with to try and reach as many people and new voices as possible. So for the purposes of this program, our definition for emerging filmmaker is that you have no more than one professional credit in the role in which you're applying, whether that's producer, writer, or director. So what do we mean by professional credit? So as I said, the goal here is to identify individuals who have, for the most part, not been working within the mainstream funding and broadcast world, and create pathways for them into that space, into working in that area. So for us, a professional credit means credit as writer, director, or producer on a completed project that sort of meets all of these criteria. Must be completed outside of a film school or an industry training opportunity, was financed using mainstream funding sources, and then subsequently played on a broadcaster or online streaming service, was released theatrically or toured extensively through major film festivals. And when we say major film festivals, it's, there's literally thousands in the world, I know. And so we're thinking about those that are really top of mind when we think about film festivals: Toronto International Film Festival, Cannes, Sundance, Clermont-Ferrand, that sort of echelon of filmmaking where you're garnering a lot of critical praise on the festival circuit. That's what we mean when we talk about that. If your film has gone to dozens of film festivals, but they are not necessarily in that group, it's fine. Another important thing to note is that we say projects that are primarily self-financed, meaning you've paid for them with credit, loans, crowdfunding sources. You do not need to count those as professional credits. You may have been working in other areas in marketing or within NGOs, but you're not developing projects that are going into sort of this mainstream broadcast world. Really, this is about, we don't want to penalize entrepreneurs and others who may have been working on the outskirts of the industry, which is why we want to try and encourage those by not discounting, not making them ineligible at this time. So some examples of what that might look like. You might not have any previous experience in the industry. You might have experience working in other roles, but you want to transition to leading a project as writer, director, or producer. Another critical piece is you might have multiple credits in one of those roles. So say you've been working for years as a producer, but you've never been able to write or direct yourself. You could apply to develop your first project as a writer or a director. Or you could have had success with a first project, and now you're looking to get your second project off the ground. And again, importantly for this is that we are looking at the spirit and intent of what we're trying to accomplish here. So take that in mind. This is, like, as I say, about opening pathways and creating space for new voices. If you think you qualify according to that spirit and intent, then we encourage you to do so. We will be reviewing all applications during the eligibility, for eligibility during the adjudication process, and we'll make final decisions at that point. As I say, this is a pilot program. pilot definition. And so, we encourage those who think they are eligible to apply, and we'll look at them all together en masse. Then we're going to move on to, in terms of equity filmmakers, how do we define that? So as I said earlier, you must self-declare in one of their following groups, either as Indigenous, Black, people of color, LGBTQ2S+, or people with disabilities. And for this particular stream, applicants can be emerging or experienced. So all of that previous conversation about what makes an emerging filmmaker, don't have to worry about that if you're applying through this stream. So getting into eligibility around what types of projects will we support? So as I said, we're really trying to be project or genre agnostic here. We want to find new voices, find new stories. So projects of most genres, length, and format can apply. There's a very small group that we will not support through this program, and that's the following. We will not support shorts that are under a broadcast half hour. That's usually around 22 or 23 minutes. We will not be supporting web series, and any projects that fall under the excluded productions in our film and television tax credit regulations. This includes things like pornography, talk shows, news, live sports or events, game shows, reality television, and advertising. So again, as I say, part of the primary goal for this project is about developing projects that will have success within mainstream broadcasters or streaming services. We want to open those doors and get people working and reaching those sort of historic gatekeepers within the industry. And so for that reason, that's why these particular genres have been excluded. We do recognize that things like shorts and web series are really a viable business model for many. And we do have other programs that support these project types. And we certainly hope to continue to do so so in the future. In terms of eligibility, eligible activities, what can you apply for money to do? Again, this pretty much is anything that sort of falls under the notion of development of a film or television project would pretty much apply here. This can include things such as rights or option fees, writing a script, conducting research or interviews, putting together visual packages, so a demo or animatics or storyboards or a lookbook of some sort. It can include all of the sort of activities that fall under polish and packaging, that pre-production phase, which is super important to getting our projects off the ground. So that can be things like putting together a production budget, location scouting, casting, that sort. You can also include legal services to support the contracting of all of these types of activities. And then if you're an individual applying as a producer or a company applying, you can include producer fees. And if you're a company applying, you can also include overhead. Generally speaking, it's important to remember that producer fees and overhead are generally a percentage of the rest of the budget, either capped at 20% each or 40% together of your other costs. The other important thing to remember about eligible activities is that the intended costs that you're proposing to us, they need to be new costs. We cannot cover work retroactively that's already occurred. So think about work that you're intending to do moving forward. Some other sort of key considerations around eligibility. So we talk a lot in the application process about the key creative team. And for the purposes of us in this program, that can mean different things for different people. But for us, key creative refers to writer, director, and producer. And it's for eligibility concerns because this is targeted funding. And the intent is really to, again, to support those underrepresented voices. We're looking for a minimum of 50% of the creative team attached must meet the eligibility guidelines for the stream you're applying in. So you can apply on your own without anyone else attached, but if you do apply, you already have a team put around your project, or you're applying with a team attached, the team together has to represent the stream in which you're applying. Further, if you're successful in your application, we ask that for this development phase, that 50% majority is also maintained. So anyone new that you hire on once we contract also needs to support that eligibility. So a couple examples around here. So say an emerging producer engages an experienced writer, that would not disqualify them, so it's 50-50. But if that producer then also adds an experienced director to the mix and they applied in the emerging stream, it would no longer be eligible. Say, for an example, an Indigenous writer decides to engage with a co-writer who does not come from one of our underrepresented groups. They wouldn't be disqualified. They're still maintaining that 50%. And lastly, just a note about that notion of maintaining that percentage. We ask that that's maintained for the work you're applying to us to do for this phase of work, but you do not need to maintain that for future phases that Creative BC may not be involved in, including production. So say, for example, you're a Black director and you use the money to develop a story outline, and then you're able to sell that to an experienced producer who's non-equity. I mean, that's great. We would consider that a success of the program and wouldn't want to stop that sort of event from happening. A quick note about shared copyright. I mentioned that earlier on. So if copyright is shared, and that's usually in the case of either a treaty co-production with another country or with another province, the applicant needs to hold the majority of the creative and financial control. So that's minimum 51% when we're dealing with interprovincial co-productions, or if it's an international treaty co-production, it needs to be reflective of the treaty agreement Canada has with the country that's represented in. Usually that's a minimum of 20%, but it will depend on that particular treaty. So we can talk about that one-on-one if that's something that applies to your situation. And as always, when there is a share of copyright, the creative and financial control of the applicant needs to be sort of commensurate to the copyright that they hold. So if you only hold 20% of the copyright of the project, you can't be on the hook for 100% of the financing. We would only be able to support 20% of that financing. And another note around co-ventures is, for example, with writers, we envision that that's potentially an opportunity that might come up quite a bit. In the case of a true co-writing situation where they're individuals that are applying, they could share the copyright 50-50. We won't require one or two of the writers to hold a majority there. This is really applying to individuals. In that instance, what we would do is we would ask one of the people to submit as the primary applicant and just make a note in the key personnel section of our application form that the other writer also shares the copyright. So for another eligibility consideration, we've had a lot of questions already about, well, I have a project that's already received funding from Creative BC. Am I eligible to apply? So yes, if you have a project that already has Creative BC funding, you can apply, but it has to be a new phase of development and new activities. So you can't stack support from Creative BC for the same development phase. So in the most part, the previous contract should be completed and closed. We will give some leeway if there are individuals who are essentially trying to submit their final reports and they just haven't been able to get them in. That can take into account sort of the adjudication period that we'll have, but really it needs to be sort of very imminent. Projects that are currently under consideration as well in another program, we will allow them to apply if that program hasn't made their decisions yet. So for this is very specific possibly to applicants to our Rogers Factual Fund. Since the deadline date for this program is before those decisions will be released, we're saying, yes, you can apply with the same program and the same activities in case that first application isn't successful. But if you are successful, and we certainly hope you are, if you're successful in that program, then we will ask you to withdraw your application from this one, again, because we can't have that stacking on the same development phase. So that's our massive section on eligibility. And I suspect that there's quite a few questions that have already come in. Matthew, what should I answer?
A few questions. So the first one, and some of these we've addressed, but people might have missed, or they might be coming up later in the PowerPoint. First one, does professional credit eligibility apply to both the equity and emerging streams?
No. So yes and no. You do not need to worry. Applicants to the equity stream can be emerging or experienced. So you can have worked in the industry for dozens of years and apply as an equity filmmaker within that stream. You don't need to worry about also meeting the emerging requirements. There are two different streams with sort of that differential in terms of the requirements to apply.
Great, which brings us to the next common question. Can you apply to both emerging and equity, or just one?
That's a great question. I think I have it in a later slide. It might have put it in the wrong section, but I'll answer it again now. Yes, if you're eligible in both, that's fantastic. And what we say in that instance is you're welcome to apply in whichever stream you would prefer. The application form does split them up for us. However, when you do that, make sure that you still fill out information about your status, self-declare your status in the key personnel section of the application process, because anyone who is eligible in both streams, we'll make sure to consider them in both streams.
Do you have any resources to assist with creating the budget? Are there any industry guidelines for how much each type of a professional might be paid?
Absolutely, it's a great question. And yes, we will. We have provided a simplified budget template alongside our application forms and guidelines on our website. And I very much encourage people to, if you don't already have a template that you're used to using, you can also use other industry standard ones that are out there, like the Telefilm or CMF budget templates. In terms of resources about about industry standards and rates, certainly in the development phase, I encourage people to look at the WGC independent production agreement for standard rates for writing. And there are some great resources out there. I'll try and dig it up and put it in the chat before the end of the session. But I found one recently on Hot Doc's website. They've got a whole section, they've got a whole presentation that goes line by line of a documentary budget template for both development and production, and what's generally included in those lines, and what type of work falls under that. It's a really fantastic resource. And even though it's specific to documentary, generally speaking, budget templates are quite general across genres. So I think it's quite applicable to those that are working in fiction or other types of genres as well. So I'll try to find the link for that and drop it in.
Next question, I think I can answer this one quickly. Somebody asks, are we able to share the programs that support shorts programming? And those, you'll find those on Creative BC on our website, again, under the development pages there. There's a number of different short supporting programs, which may be open or closed. New ones come and go all the time, but honestly, get in touch with me if you need some further support or have more questions about those particular short programs. And then another question for you, Janine. Right at the beginning of the presentation, when we were talking about copyright, you said that it was 100% copyright in order to apply. But then a bit later on, when you were talking about actually the different applicants, it comes out at the 51%. And somebody's asked some clarification on that.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of numbers and percentages that get thrown out in a really short period of time. So the 51% refers to that if you're talking about, that's referring to ownership of a company. So if a company is an applicant and you're applying, then you need to make sure that the 51% of that company is owned by an individual or individuals that meet our eligibility guidelines around either as an emerging artist or as an equity artist. So that's where maybe the 51% number came in. The second part of that is, for the most part, you need as an applicant to own the copyright in your project, but there are exceptions for interprovincial co-productions or international co-productions. And we're also saying in the case of sort of individual applicants who are writers who may own the rights in their script 50-50. We're kind of making those distinctions. So they are very specific to people that are signing co-production agreements with people or co-venture agreements. So if that's something that applies to you, or you're not sure where you fall on that, if you've got a different situation, please email me afterwards and I'm happy to follow up one-on-one.
Great. Can you take one more question?
Yeah, for sure.
If someone has funding from a network to develop a series Bible, can they use additional funding from Creative BC to develop a script?
Sorry, can you repeat that? Because I got distracted by a note about the closed captioning. I've been forgetting to repeat the question, so my apologies to anyone who's relying on the closed captioning.
At the beginning, if I have funding from a network to develop a series Bible, can I use additional funding to develop a script?
Okay, so the question is, if I have money from a broadcaster to develop it, and I'm working on a television series, can I, and it's to put together a Bible, can I request more money to develop a script? I mean, I think the short answer is yes. It's what what comes into question in your particular situation is that the same phase of activity? Is this a new phase of work? Certainly, we recognize there's many phases of work and development. And so that may be work that's done, and your next step is to work on a script, and you're applying to us to do that. We'll get into it in a little bit around budget, but if you have a phase of activity that requires, more money than we're providing, because $10,000 isn't a ton, then you need to show all of the financing to support the activities that you want to do. So that would include both your broadcaster and us to get to the end result that you want at the end of this phase of development.
Okay, great, thanks. I think we leave it there and you go on with the PowerPoint and I'll find some more questions.
All right, sounds great. Thank you, Matthew. All right, so we're going to talk quickly, or hopefully quickly, about the application process. So in terms of the pathway to success for getting your application in, I envision it as a 4-step process. So first, we encourage you very much to review the full guidelines. We have FAQs on our website. There's also an application checklist that we've provided to support you. And then there's the online submission form itself. So you can look through that entire, that whole process, or that whole form to gather information. So with all of that information in mind, gather the materials that you need. The next step, and this is important because of the targeted program that we're offering, is we ask you to make sure you confirm consent for any other key personnel that are attached to your project that are not yourself, because as the primary applicant, you're going to be asked during the submission process to self-declare on behalf of your other key creatives in regards to things like their gender and their identity. So please review those questions in advance with your team members and ensure you have their positive and informed consent to submit that information on their behalf. And then lastly, once you have all of that, you submit online. Easy peasy, right? So what does that what does that process look like? So this is just a snapshot of what our online submission form looks like. It's powered by a program called FormStack. The advantage of something like FormStack is it allows us to have one source of information and in a confidential space. Applications are automatically shared with Creative BC staff, and everything's kept in a single place. So we don't have to worry about things getting lost as email attachments or getting lost into the ether. Just a couple notes about how the form works. Anything that's required will be marked with an asterisk. Fields can be any number of things. They might be an open field that you have to enter into, could be a drop down or checklist of options where you check mark one or several things, or it may ask you to upload a file. So that's why I say use the application checklist to help you in gathering what you need and following through on the different areas of the form. With this form, you can save at any time and return to the form to make corrections before hitting submit. So you don't have to worry about finishing everything in sort of one session in your web browser. You can come back to it. As well, once you do hit submit, the form will notify you if there's a required field that's been left blank. So again, we're trying to limit the opportunity that anything is incomplete. We're trying to help you as much as we can along that way. So again, I encourage you to look at the application checklist, which will help you in that process. So a quick note, as we were just talking about the budget and financing, so you can use any budget template you would like. We do provide one on our website if you don't already have one you enjoy using. And importantly here, as I said, if you're just applying for money from us and you don't have any other costs, you're just spending up to $10,000, then great. But if you do have a larger budget and a larger phase of work you're planning, your total costs that you're proposing to us for this phase need to match your financing. So you'll need to demonstrate other financing sources. Those don't have to be confirmed at the time of application. As I say, this project does not require any other marketplace support or funders attached in order to apply. So keep that in mind, that your budget and your financing need to match. I'm sorry, just double checking. Keep in mind as well with this application process, the budget will need to be uploaded as an Excel document. And then financing sources are entered into our online submission form. So if you don't have Excel, we're not requiring you to pay for or download Microsoft Office. If you don't have Excel, you can take our form, you can convert it to a Google Sheet, which is free, in order to modify and enter it. And then you can export it from Google as an Excel document or a PDF just for the upload to our system. Again, if you hit any challenges or snags, technical difficulties through that process, please reach out to us. So just to go over some of the, just a recap, the required materials. So there's going to be the online application form, and it's going to gather information that is fall into sort of a group of key areas. So there's going to be standard contact information about the applicant. There's going to be standard information about your project, things like the genre, what length it is, its project type, its log lines. You'll have to include your budget and your proposed financing. And then the other big piece of the application form is information about yourself and your key person, the key creative team you might have attached, including those self-declaration questions that we've talked about. Part of that information about yourself, the biggest sort of single piece within that is what we call the personal statement, or a mosaic of success. And what this is it's really meant to hear about you, because this is just as much about finding potential talent as it is about supporting viable projects. So we want to know who you are and how you got to where you are now and where you want to go. This can be in written form, which is the standard way we're accepting it, but you're also welcome if you're more comfortable expressing yourself verbally, you can include a short video. We ask that video be less than 5 minutes, but you can submit it as a video if that's how you prefer talking and sharing about yourself. And if you choose to do a video, you'll have to upload it to a sharing site like YouTube and then drop a link into a document to upload to our form. So again, it's contact us if you're having troubles with that and we can help you work through that process. Just a quick note around our optional materials. When you look at the checklist, there's required materials and optional. And really, the thing to keep in mind is optional materials are just that. They are not required. They're there to give your application additional flavor and personality about you or your project that our decision teams can take into account. And that will include things like you could include a demo or a link to a previous work. You can upload a letter of support for you or your project from someone in your community or your circle. You can include additional visual materials that can't be captured in these online forms. But keep in mind, these are not required. So they're there if you want to add that, but they don't factor specifically into our decision criteria. So it's not going to negatively impact your application if they're not included. But do add them if it's something that you want to pursue. So a very common question, which I think I just saw as I glanced over, was in the chat already. Can I submit more than one application? So we anticipate that the response to this program has been really popular. So we're going to have a lot of applications. Because of that, we're asking applicants to only submit one application each. This will ensure as wide a range as possible of filmmakers will have an opportunity to apply and be considered. So I know there's a wealth of great ideas out there, and I know a hard decision to pick amongst your favorite babies, but we'll ask you to do that in this particular instance. Additionally, we ask that individuals not be attached to multiple applications in key creative positions. Again, this is about trying to create as wide a net as possible for projects to stand out and balance that with a reasonable decision process for our team. We talked about this before, so I can probably skip this, but yes, if you qualify as both emerging and equity, what do? You can apply in whichever stream you feel most comfortable in. And then we will, as long as you self-declare through our process, then we'll continue to consider you under both the streams you're eligible in. So some tips around the application and the application process. So the decision is based on the potential of the applicant and the creative potential of the project. So really the most important thing is make sure we understand who you are, how you got here, where you want to go, what are your aims and goals, so that we can get in your corner like other folks might already be there. So think about your personal statement. How does it paint a picture of who you are and what your potential is? When you think about your project materials, think about the impact of log lines and project descriptions. Log lines are not just shorter descriptions, and we don't ask them just to kind of, put you through a painful process of making a description shorter. They're really meant to be there to intrigue us. So, capture our attention, use active language. Additionally, we're going to ask some questions around who your audience is. And this isn't just about key demographics. Talk about, how is this project going to appeal or speak to a specific community? Be specific about who they are and how you intend to reach them. This will help us in assessing the viability and the potential impact of your projects. One thing to do is, consider having a trusted confidant review your work and then provide feedback to you before you submit it. It's a great way to kind of get an editing process in there. And most importantly, as I say, let your personality shine through. This is about you as much as it is about your project. So we want to get to know you. Questions? Matthew.
Lots of questions. Going back to eligibility and particularly the notion of short form projects, if somebody is applying for an animation series, say 26 episodes, but those episodes are only 22 minutes long, would be ineligible.
They're only 22 minutes long total, I'm guessing. Sorry, so the question is if someone's applying, I need to repeat, if someone's applying with an animated series that's 26 episodes long, but in total it's only 22 minutes. I mean, that's
no, 22 minutes each episode, I believe.
Oh, no, that's more than sufficient. Yeah, television series, absolutely eligible to apply because your total running time, when you think about that, it's not just one episode, it's the total running time of your series when we're talking about a television series. So it'd be 22 times 26 minutes, which I'm not going to force you to watch me do in my head right now, but it's a big number.
Next question. What about projects that are applying for funding with other sources, be part of a larger budget for a project?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So the question is, can you apply with a project that has other sources of funding? And so Creative BC is a small part of a larger budget. Absolutely. Yeah, no, this is not a problem. It's not required that any other market support is there, but certainly if you've got more activities planned than $10,000 can cover, you need to find other financing, and we very much encourage that. If you already have that financing confirmed, it can speak to the viability already of your project. While it's not required to apply, it does show that other people are already supporting the work that you do.
Can you apply for project development fund money and to this fund at the same time?
So again, not for the same project and the same phase of development and the same activities. So if it's a different project, you can apply to multiple Creative BC programs at the same time. If it's the same project, it has to be for a different phase of work and different activities that you're planning to cover. So you can't stack this program with, say, money you're getting from the project development fund.
A few more questions. You okay with a couple more?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think we're still good for time. Yeah.
Okay, great. What if a network has an option on the show? Can I use the funding to work with a network to further develop it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure about that scenario. I've generally, because I'm more used to broadcasters that would license the work from an independent producer. So in a scenario where the broadcaster owns the rights, I think we'd have to probably talk about that offline because I'm not super familiar with that scenario. I don't know, Matthew, if you've had that experience before.
No, it would be a case by case. I think we'd have to look at it and have a discussion with them. Can you apply with a project created and owned by BC residents, but then filmed in the US?
Great. So this is a question about the requirement to film. Where does it need to be filmed? So if I understood correctly, sorry, it broke up a little bit. The question is, can I apply for a project that's being developed in BC, but is intending to shoot in the United States? And the short answer is yes. We don't require you to shoot in the province, especially because this is a development phase and this is not production funding. But do keep in mind, we'll get to it in just a moment, the sort of the criteria in which we're making our decisions. Certainly projects that are international in scope are welcome and encouraged, but we are looking for projects that will appeal to a Canadian audience. So think about that and take that into consideration.
Great. Would a project with the goal of just developing the script be eligible for funding?
So the question is, would a project with the goal of just developing a script be eligible? Absolutely. You don't have to do a laundry list of activities. It can be one of those 8 or 10 that I listed. So if you're just working on a script outline or just working on the first draft or the second draft, or you're just planning to put together a demo, totally fine. It can be one of those eligible activities. It can be many of them, depending on your personal goals and the financing that you potentially have available.
And one last one then now, Janine, before you move on. How detailed does the budget need to be? Does it need to be just for this phase of development, or do you need it for the whole project?
So the question is how detailed does the budget need to be, and whether it is just for this phase or it needs to be the entire project? So yes, just this phase. You do not need to anticipate what your production budget might be, for example, or future phases of development that you haven't considered yet. Just needs to cover this phase of work. I'll leave it there. Great. All right, thank you. So we'll move on to our next section. So talking a little bit about what is the evaluation decision-making process going to look like. So again, it's a couple different steps. First, us ourselves here at Creative BC, we're going to confirm that your applications are complete. And important to note, incomplete applications cannot be accepted. We cannot accept portions of your application late after the deadline. So do make sure that everything that's being asked is submitted and in our online form before the end of that deadline date. Once we've confirmed that everything is complete, we'll do an eligibility review. And at that point, like I say, case by case, we'll look through and determine that the project and the individuals are indeed eligible in the stream that they're applying. Once both of those steps are complete, everything that's sort of gotten through to there, we'll go into a creative evaluation process, and I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. And then lastly, we'll communicate our decisions. Our goal here is to turn this around in about 8 weeks. So we're looking at late May or early June. I would love to make that faster because I know people are super anxious to get started on work. But I can't guarantee that we'll be able to do that. We do anticipate it's going to be very popular. So what does that sort of creative process look like? So we are going to be, in addition to Creative BC staff, we will be involving an advisory panel of industry experts to support us in that creative review. And those industry experts will have a sort of representative cross-section of our target demographics, both for this program and also for the province at large. That advisory panel will then provide their recommendations to us. And the panel and Creative BC staff will use the same evaluation criteria. So for the most part, the decisions should reflect that scoring between sort of the advisory group and Creative BC. At the same time, this is an intersectional lens that we're applying to most of our, all of our decision processes, including this program. So we're going to want to make sure that we have a balance that's achieved in our final recipients that include other equity factors besides what's targeted in this program, things such as gender equity, language, and regional representation. So we will take those factors into account in our final decisions. So a little bit more detail about what does that assessment criteria look like? So as I said, this is about both you as an individual, your potential as a talent potential, about finding those new voices, as well as the strength and viability of your project. So we're going to be looking at things like the capacity, knowledge, and background of the applicant, and how you articulate your career goals through your personal statement. We're also going to look at a number of different factors that speak to the strength, viability, and potential impact of your project. How is it going to reach audiences? How will it appeal to them? How is it unique and timely? And why does this story need to be told now? So altogether, that will add up to about 100 for each application, and we'll score out of that. So once we've made our decisions, what happens then? So as I say, within 8 weeks, we will communicate all decisions, and that will be communicated by email. Successful recipients will receive what we call a commitment note, confirming our commitment to them. At that point, staff at Creative BC will work with each successful recipient to review and ensure that all rights, appropriate chain of title is in place in order for you to move forward. We'll need to confirm that your full financing, if it's more than what you're asking of Creative BC, has been confirmed, and that you have an appropriate development schedule in place before we finalize a contract. Once all of those pieces are together, we'll issue a contract that's usually covered over 2 drawdowns. Usually one at sort of initial signing with all those additional materials we talked about, and then delivery of a final report and development materials at the end. One thing to keep in mind as well, which is that we're really exploring how we can provide additional supports and capacity building opportunities to our successful recipients just beyond the project money. So this may include things like professional matchmaking, network events, or workshops to augment the process. We're still working on what that looks like and what we can provide, but it is something that's important to us, that we don't want to just be kind of one and done here with, here's your project money and off you go. We are investing in you, as I say, just as much as your project. And there we go. Are there any further questions, Matthew?
There are a few questions, yeah. Most importantly, are we sharing the PowerPoint? Will that be made available later?
Yes, our goal is that we will share either the recording or the PowerPoint from the session later on, hopefully next week. So stay tuned on our website.
Great. Going back to eligibility again,
Mm-hmm.
somebody was working on a 30-minute deliverable sitcom. When you take time off the commercials and everything, the actual episode ends up being more like 26 minutes long, say, would that still be eligible?
Yes, so this is a question around sort of that definition of broadcast half hour. And yes, I mean, I know the world has changed, but with the addition of streaming services, commercials don't work the same way on every platform. But generally speaking, it's still industry standard to say a broadcast half hour is roughly 22 to 23 minutes. So, it's not hard and fast there, but I think, it has to be in that range. Again, this is about defining projects that are going to appeal to these mainstream broadcasters. So it needs to be content that's going to fit into their existing formats. And so that generally means something that's no shorter than around 22 minutes.
Right. If someone applies, guidelines allow the key team to be paid, or is it only funding to hire other professionals?
So the question is that can the funding be applied to the key creative team or only to other professionals or services you're requesting? Absolutely, it should be paying your key creative team. That's the to me, if it was, as I say, if you're just applying as an individual writer to write a script and you're only paying yourself, that's totally fine. The key creative team is absolutely the most important part. It's the crux of the process. So pay yourselves first.
One more question. If we successfully get past the development phase and into production phase, does Creative BC have the resources to fund that as well? And do we have an opportunity to pitch it to streaming services through Creative BC networks?
So this is a bit of a two-part question. One is it's about the success of the project after the development phase.
Yeah.
So first off, question about if Creative BC will be able to support the production phase of these projects. So certainly the Domestic Motion Picture Fund, that announcement from the government in the fall, this is the first time in 15 years, more than 15 years, we've had funding specifically for all phases of production projects, including production. So we're very excited about that. So yes, we will have additional programs being released, and we hope to communicate what that total sort of fund design looks like later this spring. It will include production phase programming. It may or may not be specifically targeted to those that are successful in this first round of development funding, but we are looking at how we can support projects through their entire cycle. So it is something that we're taking into consideration as we design, while also making sure we reach as many people as possible. So that was the first part of the question. The second part was about opportunities to pitch to, say, streamers with the projects we're supporting. Yes, that's what when I talk about us wanting to make sure we can provide additional supports, that's the sort of thing we're looking into, whether or not we can help facilitate that, so that we can facilitate opening those doors and meeting broadcasters, meeting streaming services. So we're trying to design sort of a full range of supports to the projects that are successful.
Great. And just one more question, and it's quite a long question, but let me read it out. If we were applying to this stream as a queer, Black, people of color, etc. writer, should we be applying with a project that represents that specific diversity within the script? Or would a queer, Black, person of color, etc. writer, producer applying with a script that doesn't focus on their specific diversity be considered equally?
So the question is that if it's an equity applicant of a particular group, say they're Black or queer, people of color, Do they need to also ensure that their project idea is from that community that speaks to specifically to those themes
Yeah.
or issues? I would say no. I mean, I think everybody, you're absolutely entitled to tell the story that you want. It's just as important for queer or Black filmmakers to be telling the stories about their communities and within their communities as it is for them to be making, you know, large budget action flicks and, you know, sci-fi thrillers. You know, it's that should not be, you know, you're only allowed to make equity stories. I think that's not the goals of this. It is about finding talent and finding projects and really opening those doors.
That's great. Thank you. That was a good answer and probably a good one to finish up on. There are some other questions which were very specific and we'd be delighted to answer those in person. So do get in touch with Janine, or if you have questions which pertain specifically to your project, then we'd be happy to answer those as well.
So yeah, so thank you, Matthew. So Matthew, just to reiterate for those on closed captioning, that yes, there were some questions that we didn't necessarily get to. They are generally quite specific to particular projects or particular scenarios. So if your question wasn't answered or you still are confused or something else comes up after the session is done that you're not sure about, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Raquel's just dropped in all of our contact information. I am the primary contact, but all three of us are here to support you, so don't hesitate to reach out. So with that, then I guess we will wrap. That was excellent timing. Thank you so much for everyone being here. This has been, again, really excited to be bringing this program to the world and really excited to start meeting all of you. So come back soon. Thank you. Take care.